So welcome everyone. This is the third talk on the Third Noble Truth. So the third talk on the Third Noble Truth deals with how we integrate it into our lives, how we live it, how we live this truth. So in many ways, for me, it's one of the key talks because when we talk about how to integrate and live the Third Noble Truth, we're really talking about how we live awakening, how we live our true from a place of our true nature. So it's really where the whole practice, where the rubber hits the road, really with the entire practice. So it's knowing that you know freedom or the cessation of suffering. It's knowing that you know this, and you know it, so you live it. It shifts you in an inner way in how you relate, and it also shifts in an outer way how you act in the world. So it has this internal and external aspect to it. It involves, of course, it involves, not being reactive to our habitual reactive tendencies, where we might react when somebody says something or something happens. These old habits that we have, of course, it means that, but it goes truly and deeply, knowing that goes beyond that to, I would say, love or metta, and wisdom or prajna, to use the Pali words metta and prajna. That those two things really come together in the way that we relate internally and to the world. And this is in just, I know many of you know this, but it's I've said it before, it's not an intellectual knowing. It's this prajna, this wisdom is a deeper knowing, a knowing that resonates from our very being. And that's what I was pointing to in the guided meditation, is really sensing in, dipping below the surface chatter of the mind. Just think of dipping below that surface chatter and sensing into the stillness that's there. We don't have to create it. There's a stillness there that we can sense into at any time. It's always present. In fact, we do sense into it as thousands of times. we just overlook it. We don't know that we're in that. We've sensed into and touched that place. I'll give you some pointers through this talk. And I think that's why it's such an important talk, is it allows anybody to taste freedom. You don't have to even have meditated for 40 years or at all. So that freedom can be touched, tasted, whatever word we want to use, and then can be taken into how we live our lives. So it's knowing that we don't know. So don't know is a critical aspect of this. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a quote: "Knowledge is knowing that we cannot know." That we cannot know. I love the way he puts that. So it's not just not knowing. The Buddha called it not knowing, and Zen they call it beginner's mind. I like that we cannot know. it's because it points to there's no use trying to know, because we can't know. I mean, one thing is certain: the next moment is going to be different from the previous moment, which is going to be different to the next moment. It'll all be different, and it's all unpredictable. We can't know what's going to unfold next. Of course, the ego mind really wants that control and predictability, and that's what we keep, grasping onto. All the grasping and pushing away is really the ego mind trying to control what's arising, control what is. It's struggling with reality. In fact, without struggle, the ego mind wouldn't exist. It needs that struggle to sustain itself. So we're really giving ourselves in this practice the gift of not knowing, or the gift of realizing we cannot know. A quote from Adyashanti: "Give yourself the gift of not knowing, and a vast spaciousness and mysterious openness dawns within you." So when we rest in that place of not knowing, dip below the chatter of the ego mind, rest in that place. This spaciousness, the mysterious openness, as Ajahn calls it, or the true nature or being, it dawns. We don't have to do anything. It just springs forward. It dawns within us. It's not something we need to create. It's always there. By resting in this place of not knowing, we allow consciousness or awareness to come to the fore. And this, of course, allows us to be with everything as it's unfolding, kind of an absolute unity or union with every part of our experience, of what's arising, where there's no longer a separation, because what the ego mind does is creates a sense of a separate self that then has to struggle with everything that's happening around it. This, on the other hand, is a complete union, oneness with every part of our experience, with everything that's arising. So it's very alive, unknowing. Some of the Christian mystics called it the unknowing I. So you can also call it unknowing, I guess. The unknowing is alive and aware. And it's a natural awareness. Nothing you need to create or fabricate. As I said last week, you could call it an unaltered state of consciousness, because it's our natural state of consciousness. The Tibetan Buddhists call it self-luminosity. I also like that as a pointer. Self-luminosity. It's illuminating, kind of the sense of light, illuminating all aspects of our experience. And as I said, we've all experienced this in our lives, thousands, many thousands, tens of thousands of times. If you go for a walk in the forest, I mean, people will have different ways that they access this, but one that I've heard from so many people is nature, being in nature, being with wildlife, trees, whatever it might be. Going for a walk in the forest, you sense the mind chatter just kind of calms, and there's kind of a dipping below that old narrative that we have, that kind of talking to ourself almost. And we dip below that, and we feel that stillness. We've all felt that. And of course, what happens is we leave the forest and our walk, and we get in our cars or whatever it might be, our daily life, and we jump back into the mind. Right? We jump into the mind, and this happens over and over again. And what's happening is the mind, the ego, really fears not being in control, and it's almost automatic that it wants to reassert the struggle, reassert the struggle to try to predict and control what's unfolding, which of course it can't. So of course it causes this suffering or uneasiness that we feel. You don't feel that uneasiness in the forest or whatever it might be that you're doing, where you dip into this sense. But as soon as you jump back into the mind, you'll notice that uneasiness sense, what the Buddha called dukkha, comes to the fore. And really, the practice can be recognizing that that's what's happened. And this is just simply anxiety and fear that's causing this jumping, this leaping back into the mind. Could say if an anxiety around not a sense of lack. I mean, the ego has a real sense of lack, not of inadequacy. And I think when we're living in that place, we all feel this sense of inadequacy or somehow a sense of lack. And of course, the ego feels a sense of lack because it's not truly who we are. It can never feel whole and complete because it's not who we truly are. We're not truly a separate self, which is what the ego is constructing. I'll read a quote from, I've read this before, but it's one of my favorites, from Suzuki Roshi. If your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. If your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. I used to have a sign on my door at the university that it was a beautiful little, calligraphy sign that said "empty mind." And it was hanging on the door. It's probably not what students were looking for in their professor, but it always did spark some dialogue about what empty mind meant. But I taught social work, and teaching social workers to be receptive, to be speaking and listening from that deeper place, as opposed to the superficial chatter of the mind, is where we can really, a place from which we can really connect with people at a whole other level. At a whole other level. But that's a whole other story. I used to do little exercises where I'd get them to connect, and I would just give them a topic, and they'd kind of connect at this usual kind of level. And then I would do some meditative exercises, meditation. I'd basically get them to meditate, and then get them touching into the deeper sense, and then get them to have a dialogue about a similar topic. And after each one, they would tell each other what they heard. And then after the exercise, they would go, oh my goodness, after the second time, the person heard so much more. So they got the felt sense of what I was saying, not just the words. So this is how, we can bring this into our lives in so many ways. So we still need the practical knowledge. Some people think, well, does not knowing mean I don't know anything? That I just does empty mind? Students would say, does empty mind mean that you don't actually know? You have nothing to teach. You have no knowledge. And of course, it doesn't mean that. We use our relative or practical knowing to navigate the world, to navigate relationships. So the practical knowing isn't in opposition to this greater field or deeper knowing. It actually arises within it. So you could say that pure knowing arises to the mind, not from the mind. This deeper place of knowing rises to the mind. So the mind simply recognizes, oh, there's that knowing coming from the deeper place, as opposed to coming from the mind. So our relationship to thought is very critical in this. In fact, your relationship to your thinking tells you a lot about your level of understanding or your level of realization in this path, this work. Your relationship with your thinking, you can really look at that to sort of, if you're wondering, oh, how am I doing? Well, what's in this practice? What's your relationship to thought? This Sunday, you could find this online, I'm sure. A teacher that I have a lot of respect for. Her name's Byron Katie. Perhaps some of you have heard of her. She's got some books out. So Byron, Byron, is the first name, and her books deal with how we look at our relationship to thoughts. What she's most well known for is the 4 questions. You've heard of those that she teaches. So the first question is it true? Second question is, can you absolutely know that it's true? Third question is, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And what would you be without that thought? These are 4 questions that you can ask. But she's doing a 2-hour online Sunday, a free session. And she would be someone who's talking from the place of wisdom. So really looking at how we relate to our thoughts. Do we believe all our thoughts? Do thoughts kind of dictate what we're doing moment to moment, or do we dip below all that chatter and relate from that place? You could call it intuition. Some people call it intuition. Musicians and athletes call it flow. If you've done some work in those areas, so like for me, one of the sort of one of the really good examples of somebody in flow as a jazz musician, who's what's the word when they're just playing sort of whatever arises. It's not a set piece of music, and what spontaneously comes out of the musicians as a group. That group or individuals are in a place of flow. They're operating from that deeper place. They can't be caught in the mind of notes and trying to, do all. It would be impossible to do well. I should say. I guess you could perhaps wing it if you had enough experience, but to do it well, you would be in this place of flow. Athletes, they just get lost in the activity. There's no longer thinking about outcomes or about this and that. They're in the below the chatter of the mind and in the activity. In fact, if you look at mindfulness, the whole mind of the mindfulness movement is asking people to pay attention to what they're doing moment by moment. What that request is to get out of the mind and into objects that are in your experience, to be with whatever you're doing, you're in your experience. And of course, when the mind does a U-turn and starts coming back and looking, being self-referential, which it often does, self-conscious, self-referential, try to just go back to awareness of what you're doing. It's a big part of mindfulness. So that basic training is already sort of setting the foundation for being in this place of our true nature. So we have you could say we have a lighter relationship to thoughts. You realize that they can't tell us what's ultimately true. We find we don't have to defend our beliefs and opinions. We find that we're perhaps willing to be wrong. So it's just this lighter, easier relationship to thoughts. As I said, we still utilize our thoughts to navigate the world. This, when we use the word insight, have you heard that? We call this insight meditation. This is what we mean. This is the intuitive understanding that's coming from this deeper place of being. That's why it just kind of occurs to us. It's like an aha moment. And insight just arises to the mind. Of course, then the mind often latches onto it and starts to do stuff with it, because we jump into the mind, right? But that's what an insight is. That's what awakening, an awakening. If you think of small awakenings, they're this intuitive understanding. So it's realizing that reality arises beyond the thinking mind. And so we're using the thinking mind to relate to the world. Right? We still use the thinking mind to relate and navigate the world, but it's not it's not to control the world to be the way that we think it should be. right? We're letting the moment arise as it is, right? Accepting that moment as it is. Doesn't mean, we don't then act, right? The the fact that we're not fighting with every moment allows us to receive the moment from a place of wisdom, and then act in a way that comes from that place of prajna. So if you find people that operate from this place are actually very busy people. It's not like they sit around; they're all in caves, you know, staring at the wall. They're actually very often, not all the time, but often I find they're very busy people, and not all of them are writing books and giving talks to huge groups like Byron Katie does, and Eckhart Tolle and people like that, who has millions of views on his YouTube videos. Some are acting in the world in other ways, for social justice, or just working in a hospice, or whatever it might be. But all that action is coming from this deeper place of wisdom. So life becomes kind of a dance, and we speak and we listen and we act from this deeper place. I'll read this. A T.S. Eliot poem from the Four Quartets. We shall not cease from exploration. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started, and to know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning, at the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. So till we arrive, it's through the unknown that we arrive where we started, and we know the place for the first time. So we arrive at that deeper, still awareness, deeper sense of being. It's always there, but we kind of see it for the first time. So you could say it's inspired thinking. I heard somebody call it inspired thinking, creative thinking. It's really kind of being open to everything, because we're not separate. So we're open. Because we're not separate from anything. And noticing when we touch that place, this is so crucial to recognize this, that when we touch this place of unknowing, or the source of our being, that we notice how the ego mind pulls back, leaps back from it, jumps back into the mind, to the mind of trying to predict and control. So just notice when that happens, and not resisting it, but say, oh, look, that's interesting. There's the mind that, based on a kind of a fear and an anxiety, leaping back into the mind. Dogen, Zen teacher, called it intimacy with the 10,000 things. Nice word, intimacy with the 10,000 things. And of course, 10,000 things simply means everything. Intimacy with the 10,000 things. And we're intimate. When we're intimate with life, we're with the flow of moments, the stream of moments. We relate in a different way. Can you see how we can relate in such a different way from this place of being in the flow of moments, as opposed to the ego mind that struggles struggles with the moments, struggles with what is, that self-referential mind that comes up. And you notice it when it comes up, eh? And that's what this practice is. It's being, how could I say it? It's being intentional rather than habitual. And it's being conscious rather than unconscious. If you could think of it that way. So we're simply being conscious of the mind jumping back from the source, from the place of unknowing. So we can be intentional. We say, okay, I want to live from this deeper place. Like in a way, what is, if that's what's important to you, then you can set the intention to notice when you're not living from that deeper place. Noticing when you are in that self-referential mind chatter. Again, not resisting it. It's just in the noticing that things shift. We don't have to resist anything. It's just in the notice that just bringing it into awareness shifts what happens next. So being conscious and intentional, and add in non-judgmentally, and you pretty much have the path. There's a Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. I think Jack Kornfield has a book that has a similar title, and I think it has the same theme, but he's talking about laundry, I think. In other words, you continue to act in the world. You just relate in different ways. And this can be useful in our jobs. Intuition. I got asked. So there was a CEO of CMH, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, who had, well, it's public knowledge, he had Parkinson's disease, and he was really relating to the illness through mindfulness practices and very, very much through meditation. So he saw the power of meditation in his life. So he wanted all his senior managers, the CFO and CIO, this is how CMHC is kind of organized, it's got more corporate names, to do mindfulness training. And he got wind of me and asked me to come in and do mindfulness training. And I guess I had time at the time. I had some time, and I was kind of intrigued by him and his story. And I was intrigued by getting into a room with these people in three, suits, and they're very much on a professional, busy track, just turning off their cell phones for a little bit of time was a big step in for them. But we really explored this notion of intuition and bringing that into how decisions were made, and they really resonated with this practice, and that they could access something beyond, the sort of analytic mind, which is all very useful, and I know the spreadsheets are all useful, but they could bring natural mind to bear on it in so many different ways that they found it useful. Yeah. In fact, when I was a management consultant, I used to, I'd have all the reports, all the data and everything done. And then I would meditate for a lengthy period of time. And then I would just sit with a pen, not a keyboard. And this goes back. We did have keyboards, but it was faster with the pen. And I would just draw circles with words in it, and lines and circles. And I would just draw this bubble diagram with all these circles and connections, and just whatever flowed out of my mind. There was no, it's kind of like brainstorming in a sense with myself, just to brainstorm and just letting it all flow. And then I would do this until it kind of petered out. And then I would bring the analytic mind to bear on it and try and make the sense of it. And then I would write the conclusion, or the conclusion of the report based on that that process. And so many times we would get feedback saying that conclusion just tied everything together for me. I was, I kind of got this, and I got that part of what was being said, but the conclusion really just made it whole, because it was coming from a place of wholeness. It brought all the separate parts together. So it can impact our lives. It's this practice in this way where it's where the rubber hits the road. This practice is really how we live, is what's important. How we relate internally and how we act in the world and with other people. So the Tao Te Ching has something to say about this as well. Chapter 63 of the Tao Te Ching. Practice non-doing. Work without doing. Taste the tasteless. Magnify the small. Increase the few. Reward bitterness with care. See simplicity in the complicated. Achieve greatness in little things. In the universe, the difficult things are done as if they are easy. In the universe, great acts are made out of small deeds. The sage does not attempt anything very big and thus achieves greatness. Easy promises make for little trust. Taking things lightly results in great difficulty, because the sage always confronts difficulties. He or she never experiences them. Practice non-doing, work without doing, taste the tasteless. This and I hear this notion of non-doing. So it comes from the Tao Te Ching or Taoism. But I hear it being spoken about more and more in insight meditation and Buddhist Dharma talks, as a way to point to how we can bring this practice at a very deep level into our lives. So it means no doing is happening. So we're not jumping into the mind and doing from a place of beliefs and opinions and old habits of reaction. We're doing from this other place. So the question that's often asked is, well, how do we do the doing of non-doing. How do you do it? And I've pointed to that a little bit in terms of touching into the silent space of awareness. But I think also you could say, and the Tao Te Ching points to this, I think, is embracing uncertainty, unpredictability. When we can embrace this, we can see the value of not knowing. This can be an avenue of love and an avenue of not knowing. So in a sense, the heart and the mind are open to the moment. Open to the moment. Because we talk about the heart and the mind, and they're all connected, right? I mean, so it's basically our being is open to the moment. You could talk about it as the heart and the mind being open. So this kind of embracing uncertainty can be kind of as a portal or a gateway to this deeper knowing, or a portal to our deepest values, our deepest aspirations. Like, what's really important to us? What's the most important thing to you in life? These are the things that come from this deeper place in our being. And you find with this practice, the more uncertain you are, the more silent you become. The more not knowing you are, the more silent you become. And from there, the deepest knowing arises. The deepest knowing arises from this silent awareness. So the more uncertain you are, the more not knowing you are, the more you can touch into that place of prajna, of love and prajna, love and wisdom. And kind of go beneath the surface ideas and narrative of the mind. So we're not resisting the mind. It's kind of going beneath it. I like sometimes the analogy of the ocean is interesting. That we're kind of the surface waves, and the way the surface of the ocean can be, it can be still at times. Our minds can be still, or can be wavy. And you go below the surface of the waves. If you've ever scuba dived, it's something I took up 1989. I think I got my scuba license, and I really enjoyed that stillness that you feel in quiet when you're underneath. And if you look up, if the water's clear, you can see all that surface stuff. So that kind of metaphor helped me in understanding sort of what that deeper stillness kind of feels like, kind of sense into it. Yeah. Well, I'll open it up for questions in a sec. I'm going to talk just a little bit about next week because I don't want to forget next session. So next session, we start the fourth noble truth, which is the Eightfold Path. So it's really this, here's the path to, you know, the cessation of dukkha, of suffering and stress. So it's kind of his like, here's 8 things you do, 8, 8 things to practice. I kind of look at them as trainings and and practice, as opposed to, they're not commandments in any way, but they're like 8 trainings for bringing about a profound shift within ourselves and how we act in the world. And if we really look at them in that way, they have so much to offer. So they guide us on how to be continually intentional and conscious, so to speak. And I just got, it's a hot off the press, it just came out, book called A Whole Life Path, a Lay Buddhist Guide to Crafting a Dharma-Infused Life by Gregory Kramer. Gregory was one of my early insight meditation teachers many years back, and so he's got a book called Insight Dialogue, which is about how we bring this practice into our communication, to our dialogues. And this is basically, he's taking the Eightfold Path and takes each aspect and looks at how we can live a Dharma infused life using those aspects. So I haven't decided sort of how I'm going to, whether we do a session on each of the Eightfold Path or not. I might clump a few, but I mean, right view is definitely one that we could, and right intention. So the first few we could definitely spend some time on, and then maybe some of the others we'll cluster together, but that's to be determined as of yet. So yeah, so just wanted to say that before, so I didn't forget when we ended. So yeah, I'd like to open it up for any questions on that talk or anything else that's coming up in your practice.
Hi, Steve. I was when you brought up jazz and improvisation, it made me think of there's been a bunch of people who talked about their work with Miles Davis. I'm not sure whether it was Sonny Rollins or Herbie Hancock, who said at one point in time that it goes back to Don't Know Mine too, because Miles Davis looked at this guy and said, "I want you to play what you don't know."
Uh-huh.
You know, and I get that. Because it was like, it was saying, I want you to do improvisation. I want you to kind of just let out whatever is there without thinking, just do it. And it's one of the joys of playing music. And it's one of those times where of those thousands of times that you talk about where you actually are in it. And but I thought it was just something I just wanted to share. I thought, just play what you don't know. It was a very kind of insightful way for him to say, get out of yourself, get out of your, all your music theory, and just let it go. And as a musician myself, those are the times when you just kind of go, wow. You're you lose yourself, and you're just in the music that you're playing, and everybody's in the groove, and it's just a blast. It's very, it's that just a joyful process. So yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's where I take my my I guess refuge. It's one of the one of those where your band becomes your sangha in a sense. So yeah, so it's cool. I mean, thank you. It kind of made me think of all those things. I thought I'd share it.
And thanks for that. And if so it is a refuge. And if we can, so we're touching that place. If we can be more, if we can be totally present and conscious, totally present for that the experience of being out of our minds, then we can we can bring that into other aspects of our life. So I invite everybody, that has these kinds of activities where they do get out of their minds, to really sense into and feel that, so that they can live that beyond that place, so their whole life becomes a refuge, right? The life can be lived from that place, and not just our music or our sports, or I mean that's what attracts us to all this stuff, right? Because we get out of our minds. I'm just astonished at how many people do all these extreme sports, and it's you can't be in your head when you're doing something, and your life's kind of on the line. Like fear alone of death will keep you focused on in flow. It has a funny way of doing that, and just amazed at how many people engage in these. And I have a good friend who spends 6 hours of his day engaged in these kinds of activities. And I just say, bring that in out of the sport and into other aspects of our lives. And the whole life can have that same feel, that same joy, that same sense of love, that same wisdom. It's always there. It's always present, right? We just overlook it, jump out of it, whatever, however you want to put it, jump back into the narrative. So yeah, that would be a good practice for the week, is to see how we can bring that sense into other aspects of our life, and see how it shifts how we relate to what's arising moment by moment, and it shifts how we act with other people, and it shifts what activities we see as important in our lives, and activities that we bring our time and attention to. See how all that shifts when we spend more time in that deeper place of being.
Stephen, you said something tonight about during the meditation. I think it was about the space between breaths. Did I hear that right?
It's close, the space around the breath.
The space around what? Can you say more about it? Because whatever it was, it got me there, but I have no idea how or why, or I mean, that was some of the deepest meditation I've done in quite a while. And it was that phrase, but I have no idea what I was doing differently.
Yeah, well, what I think I said, whatever feels most natural or easiest. Either the belly, right? The space around the breath, or the stillness that's already and always present, the still awareness. So either one of those, it can be a gate or a portal to the deeper sense of being. So yeah, it's whatever resonates. I mean, it's all these practices are simply ways of getting us out of our thought narratives into to touch into a deeper sense of being, right? Become human beings rather than human doings, as John Kabat-Zinn says. So that's I say this is a foundational practice because it does offer that variety, and it does take a certain sequence. So you know, I invite you to, I'll put that, make sure I get that recording up on the
It's,
website. And you can kind of use it as, I know use it as a foundational practice, a practice that you know, could do more regularly. There's a lot of talking in it. I realized kind of as I got halfway through that I was, but and it's funny, you know, when you give a meditation from your analytic mind, you hardly say anything because you go, oh, I should say, oh no, that's no, not. You kind of talk yourself out of the next thing to say. It's a really funny process, guiding meditations, and I've done that, right? And people say, well, you hardly said anything, and what you said, I didn't really understand, but when you offer meditation, it's simply what's arising. That it tends to be, for me, for this personality anyway, it tends to be more chatty, more talking, which is kind of funny, eh? From a place of stillness, more verbiage emerges. And that's kind of what happened there. So I hope I'll listen to it again and see if there's a bit too much, maybe. So because you need to silence the non-instructional moments to be able to do what's being offered, right? To actually rest in those things. But yeah, the space around the breath is, or space between the breaths. If that's what you heard, then go with that. If that brings you to that stillness, that still awareness, then yeah, just go with space between the breaths. It's just as, yeah, maybe I'll probably use that at some point now that I've heard you say it. It works just as well.
mhm. Yeah, there's something about focusing on the breath that takes more effort and keeps me from getting into that silence. I've never liked awareness of breath meditations because of it. And somehow and that phrase sidesteps that issue for me beautifully. So thank you.
Yeah. We all have different personalities, right? Different constitutions. In Ayurvedic, they talk about the Pitta, the Kapha, and the Vata. I don't know if you've ever done any of that Ayurvedic yogic stuff, and they'll actually figure out what you are, whether you're, so I'm a Pitta Vata, which is kind of an airy, Vata is this airy sense, and Pitta is a vibrational sense. I can't remember what Kapha is. My wife's Kapha. I think it's more confusion. I won't tell her that. But so you can kind of, if your constitution is more in a particular way, then different meditations will resonate, right? So a Pitta usually has an active mind and is just vibrational, like spicy food and this kind of personality. A nice Vata meditation just kind of, the word space kind of resonates. The peacefulness kind of resonates, right? Vata, because they're already spacey, likes to have it's a breath. I get ground. I'm going to ground myself here. So you need something that feels more grounding, or the body, the sensation of the body sitting here can be grounding. So really, it's whatever works for you. Follow that. That's what I would say. Follow those doing those meditations. I know we can maybe resist things that cause us difficulty, so we have to be aware of that, right? So if difficult things come up in a meditation, like with a body scan for some people, so I hate the body scan. I mean, that's another issue, and you can explore that at some point. But for the most part, I'd say go with what resonates and what brings you to that still aware place.
Just have a quick check-in question about the connection. I've been reading about the Four Noble Truths, and I'm sort of trying to connect tonight's talk with the third noble truth. And so for me, it's a little bit of a struggle. So I'm wondering if you could help me with that.
Yeah. So the third noble truth is that the cessation of dukkha is possible, right? The second is the cause of dukkha, and the first is that there is dukkha. So that third noble truth being that cessation of suffering is another way of saying freedom or liberation or enlightenment. So the last week I talked about how, how we directly experience that truth. And then the third talk is always, how does that change how we live our lives? So really what I was trying to do is point to how awakening affects our lives, but no, it doesn't have to be, total, spontaneous, realizations. In fact, most people I've met just kind of plod along with a lot of little awakenings, a lot of insights. Then they pile up. I know people talk about these, spontaneous boom, and maybe that's something that happens as the little ones, pile up. The pile gets so high that there's, it's you're smothered under insights and you become totally awakened. Whatever that means, I don't know. Yeah, to answer your question, that's what it had to do with the third noble truth. It's how you live the cessation of suffering. And the cessation of suffering comes about when we no longer grasp, we no longer push away. Because that's the cause. Remember, the cause in the second noble truth is the cause of suffering is clinging and craving, pushing away and grasping. So this is the cessation is when that stops. Well, when that stops, what's left is being okay with whatever is. Something arises, you don't push it away, you don't grasp it. What's left is it's really a more detailed way of saying being with everything as it is. So when you're with everything as it is, there's no struggle. The ego has nothing to do. In fact, the ego does all that struggle because that's the only way it can sustain itself. When there's no struggle is another way of saying, grasping and pushing away. When there's no struggle, there's just this peacefulness. And this peacefulness comes from this not knowing or being okay with uncertainty. Because if we think we know and we think we can predict and we think we can control, then we're not going to rest in that place. Right? We're going to continue to try to predict and control and struggle, which is the ego's modus operandi. So that's what it has to do with it. It's really tasting that. So if we can taste those, we can first recognize those moments when we're below, when we're below the surface of ideas and the narrative and reactions and habits, when we can first recognize that we're there in that still, quiet, aware place. Well, first we recognize we're there, we taste it, and then we say, okay, what would action or what would navigating the world from this place be like? And you can then start to rest there and then move in the world from that place. And when the mind jumps in and starts to be self-referential, you just, oh, well, there's the mind doing its thing. Of course, the ego is going to want to get involved. It's not just going to, it doesn't go away quietly. I can guarantee you that. And then it doesn't need to go away because it's all part of the whole, right? I mean, but it doesn't kind of allow, it's funny. You'd think consciousness, you think the ego would just go, okay, if I'm sick of struggling, I'm just going to let consciousness take over. Right? Wouldn't you? It just kind of, consciousness wants to reveal and you can really sense it the more you touch into it. Consciousness just really wants to emerge and dawn. And ego's just this constantly jumping in and pushing and pushing. So it's a funny, from where I am right now in my practice, it's a bizarre thing to watch. The ego will drum up fear and sense pleasures like crazy. My ego decided I loved wine all of a sudden, and now I got to buy a lot of wine. And I'm looking at people wine and think, oh, I got to get some more wine. Let's try this. Like, what's going on with that, right? It's just it's constantly trying different things. And when you hear about the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, he's going to sit here until he becomes enlightened. Well, what happened? Mara, which is the ego kind of coming in, started with sense pleasures and tried to tempt him with all these, oh, you don't want to do this, you should do this. Then that didn't work. So then went to fears and tried demons and, stirred up a lot of fear. And then finally said, who do you think you are that you can become enlightened? And he just touched the earth. That's why you see so many of the Buddha images of Buddha's hand just kind of just like this, touching the earth. And that's basically saying, I'm part of the whole. I'm part of the whole. That's why, I'm just seeing that I'm part of the whole. So that story seems really kind of quirky when you read it, or kind of, but when you really see what it's saying so much. And the ego will just do the weirdest, strangest, unpredictable things. Consciousness, you can feel consciousness dawning and be resting, and all of a sudden to see what the mind jumps in with. Just watch it. It's bizarre. I mean, you've seen this. I mean, Carl talked about playing, improv music. Well, even when you're doing that, the mind will jump in with some pretty weird things in that space. When I'm doing sports, I'll see the mind jump in with some pretty strange things, and all we do is notice. That's what's happened. We don't need to resist it. So that's what happens. It's the awareness itself is enough. Just bring awareness to it. I got a little bit on a tangent there, but that's how it relates to the third noble truth. It's how we live this Dharma-infused life, as Gregory Kramer talks about it. And I think as we explore the Eightfold Path, the Eightfold Path kind of gets it down more to the nuts and bolts. Like this is, view, intention, action, mindfulness. It kind of goes through each of them, and how we, how those are part of the pathless path. Well, that was a long answer to a simple question. I get excited when I talk about the ego, because I'm still amazed at what the ego can come up with, and I'm sure you see it too in your in your practice. So if you sit down to meditate for any length of time, you'll see what the mind starts going on about. It's just what is. It's all part of the whole as well. So we're not trying to get rid of the ego. Just trying to see, trying to lift the veil of the illusion of the separate self that the ego constructs and to connect with the whole. Yeah. You guys are great for staying on computers for this length of time, I must say. How are people enjoying the Zoom sessions? Longing for the, yeah. Some people prefer it almost, yeah.
I'd say there are pros and cons.
Mm.
You know, sometimes live, sometimes from home. It's kind of nice if we could.
Yeah. Yeah, we could almost do kind of a few at home, a few Zoom, or, kind of go back and forth even. Yeah. We may have some time yet to think about that. Yeah.
In the dead of winter, it will be awfully nice to do this from my living room instead of driving all the way into the city.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you next week. Be well, everyone. Take care.
Thanks,
Namaste.
Stephen.
Thank you,
Be
Stephen.
safe.
Good to see
Take
everyone.
care, everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Bye.
See you too.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Take care.